Queen said tonight they were planning a big musical event dedicated to their lead singer, Freddie Mercury, who died last night of AIDS.
He had one more day left, but no one, not even the band, knew it. November 23rd, 1991. London woke to whispers. TV anchors spoke in hushed tones. Radios interrupted their songs mid-chorus. Every channel repeated the same impossible headline. Freddie Mercury has AIDS? For years, rumors had circled him like ghosts. Too wild to believe, too persistent to ignore. He denied them all, smiled through the questions, hid the trembling hands behind champagne glasses and spotlights. But that morning, the truth came from his own mouth. A truth that stunned the world into silence. 24 hours later, the silence deepened. Freddie Mercury, the man who could make an arena of 100,000 scream in harmony, was gone. Outside his home, Garden Lodge, the streets overflowed with grief. Fans covered the gates in roses, letters, and photographs until the walls disappeared beneath color. Some sang Bohemian Rhapsody through tears. Others stood speechless, staring at the house that now felt like a tomb. Reporters called it the day music died again, but for millions it felt even heavier. The day freedom itself went quiet. Because Freddie wasn't just a singer, he was the embodiment of rebellion wrapped in silk and thunder. He dared to live as if judgment didn't exist, and the world loved him for it. Until it didn't. Behind the cameras, though, was a man torn between brilliance and burden. He'd conquered fame, love, and loneliness, but peace? That was the one thing he never managed to own. Even as his body weakened, his mind burned with one last idea. He was planning something no one else knew about. His final act. And when the world thought it had already heard his last song, Freddie Mercury was quietly preparing to leave one more message behind. A message powerful enough to outlive him. Before we uncover what that secret was, and how he crafted it in the shadows of his final days, make sure you're part of this journey. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you were doing the first time you heard Freddie's voice. Because from here on, the story only gets louder. The parties were legendary, but so were the silences that followed them. Freddie Mercury could fill stadiums with a single note, yet when the doors closed and the lights faded, the sound that haunted him most was his own heartbeat. The louder the crowd screamed, the quieter the nights became. He lived in two worlds: Freddie, the icon, the untouchable showman, and Farouk, the shy boy from Zanzibar who still flinched when someone looked too closely. He'd built a life of mirrors. Gold jackets, champagne towers, endless laughter, all reflections meant to distract from what hid underneath. Because underneath the glitter there was exhaustion. Those who knew him best said Freddie feared stillness more than death. He believed that if he ever stopped, if he let the silence win, the legend would collapse and the world would see how fragile he really was. So he kept moving. Parties bled into rehearsals, rehearsals into flights, flights into sleepless mornings where he'd sit alone at his piano, whispering melodies only the moon could hear. He was obsessed with the idea of becoming immortal before dying. Every lyric, every note, every outrageous performance, it wasn't vanity. It was a race against time. He once said, "The moment I stop performing, darling, I'll start dying." At the time, it sounded like bravado. Later, everyone realized he meant it. But that unstoppable energy came with a cost. Fame didn't just make him adored, and it made him a prisoner. Behind the makeup and thunder, Freddie carried wounds no spotlight could hide. He loved deeply, but never quietly. He trusted, but rarely twice. And as the walls of fame closed tighter, he learned to protect himself the only way he knew how: with performance. Every outrageous outfit, every headline-grabbing stunt, every roar from the stage was armor. Armor against loneliness, against judgment, against the fear that he was too strange, too wild, too much for the world. Yet even the brightest mask begins to crack. And when Freddie's did, it revealed something no one expected. Not weakness, but defiance. Because when the world tried to shame him for who he was, he didn't hide. He created something no one could ignore. A statement so bold it shook MTV, scandalized America, and turned rebellion into art. But that's the thing about Freddie Mercury. When the world said no, he turned it into a song. It started as a joke. At least that's what everyone thought. A parody of everyday life. A man in a wig, heels, and pearls, vacuuming a carpet in a mock British living room. But when Freddie Mercury stepped into that role, something happened. Something raw. Something real. I Want to Break Free wasn't just another Queen song. It was a message hidden in plain sight. his coded confession to the world. While audiences laughed at the sight of Freddie in drag, few realized he was mocking the cages he'd been forced to live in. The gender roles, the labels, the whispers. He wasn't pretending to be someone else. He was showing the world what freedom actually looked like. But freedom, as Freddie knew too well, comes with a price. The video dropped like a bomb. MTV banned it. Sponsors fled. American audiences, the same ones who once worshipped him, turned their backs. Tabloids sneered. Has Queen gone too far? Freddie didn't blink. If they can't handle a man in heels, he said, they've never tried living in mine. For him, the song was never about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was about honesty, about tearing away the glitter, the fear, the shame, and saying, this is me. And while America turned away, the rest of the world embraced it. In South America, crowds of hundreds of thousands screamed the lyrics back at him. In Eastern Europe, it became an underground anthem of resistance. In Brazil, men and women sang it through tears, defying governments that tried to silence them. Freddie had done what no artist had dared to do so openly, use humor to fight prejudice and vulnerability to conquer fear. And behind the camera, something extraordinary was beginning to happen. Among the people who admired his fearlessness was someone few would ever imagine, a woman whose life was bound by rules, duty, and public scrutiny. A princess who saw in Freddie the very thing she longed for most, freedom. That night, two worlds would collide, royalty and rebellion. In a story so unbelievable it sounds like myth, but it wasn't. It happened. It began with laughter, the kind that only happens when opposites collide. In Freddie Mercury's Kensington living room, champagne flowed, music thundered, and in the middle of it all sat Princess Diana, cross-legged on the carpet, eyes sparkling with mischief. "All right, Freddie," she said. "What are we doing tonight?" The room fell silent. Everyone stared. The question was absurd. She was the Princess of Wales, after all. But Freddie only smiled. "We're going out, darling, to a place where no one will ever believe you've been." The plan was ridiculous, dangerous, and perfect. Minutes later, the world's most famous woman stood in front of a mirror wearing a leather jacket, aviator glasses, and a camouflage cap. Freddie had disguised her himself. No crown, no diamonds. Just anonymity, the one luxury royalty could never buy. Together, they slipped into London's Royal Vauxhall Tavern, one of the city's most iconic gay bars. The place was alive. Drag queens dancing on the bar, smoke curling under the colored lights, laughter echoing off the walls. And there, in the middle of it all, Princess Diana ordered a white wine and a beer, blending into the crowd like she'd belonged there her whole life. Freddie watched her carefully. For once, he wasn't the spectacle. She was. And she loved it. For the first time in years, she wasn't being watched, judged, or photographed. She was just free. Later that night, as they left through the back door, she whispered to him, "That was the best night of my life." Freddie grinned. "Now you know what freedom feels like, darling." It was one of those stories that sound too outrageous to be true. But it was. And while that night stayed hidden from the public for years, it revealed something deeper about Freddie Mercury. He didn't just crave freedom for himself. He wanted everyone he loved to taste it too. But not every friendship with a superstar ended in laughter and secrets, because the next one would begin with excitement and end in chaos. It should have been the greatest duet in history, the king of pop and the queen of rock. Two icons, two perfectionists, two unstoppable forces. In 1983, Freddie Mercury arrived at Michael Jackson's California mansion, ready to record 3 songs that could have defined an era. The world would never hear them, because within days the dream collapsed. At first, everything sparkled. Michael admired Freddie's wild stage presence. Freddie marveled at Michael's discipline. They laughed, exchanged melodies, tested harmonies that sent shivers down the studio walls. For a few hours, it felt like magic. Then came the moment that changed everything. Freddie walked into the recording room and froze. Beside Michael's microphone stood a llama. A real llama. Freddie blinked. "Michael, darling," he said carefully, "I perform with stars, not livestock." Michael didn't laugh. He just smiled softly. "He calms me down." The mood shifted. Every take grew colder, every note more strained. Freddie, the storm of spontaneity, clashed with Michael, the architect of control. Their visions were too different, one chaotic, one precise. And beneath that creative tension simmered something else. Distrust. Michael disapproved of Freddie's hard-partying lifestyle. Freddie couldn't stand Michael's paranoia. "I think he's too strange," Freddie told his assistant later. "Even for me." Within days, Freddie packed up and left the studio. The tapes, fragments of State of Shock, Victory, and There Must Be More to Life Than This, were locked away. Years later, a few demos would leak, ghostly echoes of what might have been. You can hear their laughter between takes, two geniuses trying to coexist inside a room too small for both. But that laughter fades fast, replaced by silence, the kind that only fame can create. Because both men, for all their glory, were lonely. They could control everything, except how it felt to be adored by everyone and understood by no one. For Freddie, that realization cut deep. He started to party harder, stay up longer, laugh louder, anything to drown the quiet. The lights, the noise, the excess, it was all just a distraction. But you can only outrun silence for so long. And when the music finally stopped, it wasn't a journalist or a rival who caught up with him. It was his own body, whispering the words that would change everything. If sin had a soundtrack, it was played at Freddie Mercury's parties. Champagne pyramids reaching the ceiling, drag queens twirling on tables, dwarfs carrying silver trays filled with white powder. The air was thick with perfume, sweat, and laughter, the kind that hides exhaustion behind glitter. Freddie didn't throw parties, he performed them. Each night was a stage, and everyone there, from rock gods to fashion icons, became part of his theater of chaos. His energy was endless, his charm disarming. But behind that sparkle was something darker, a man trying to feel alive by pushing every limit he could find. The most infamous of all took place in New Orleans, 1978. 400 guests, Bowie, McCartney, Elton John, and a storm of strangers packed the Fairmont Hotel. Midnight came. The lights dimmed, and as the crowd screamed, a massive cake rolled in, sculpted like a human torso filled with champagne and topped with fireworks. The room exploded in cheers. Cameras flashed. It was pure madness, exactly as Freddie intended. But even that night, amid the chaos, something was off. He'd smile, then drift away mid-conversation, lost in thought. The closer the music got to perfection, the farther he drifted from peace. Friends noticed the change. He was drinking more, sleeping less. He'd go days without eating, then vanish behind closed doors for hours. One night, during another wild party, he locked himself in his suite. His partner, Jim Hutton, broke down the door and found him trembling. "I feel like I'm burning alive, darling," Freddie whispered. Minutes later, he wiped his face, straightened his shirt, and went back downstairs, the laughing, dancing, performing. To the world, he was unstoppable. To himself, he was disappearing. Because that was the paradox of Freddie Mercury. The brighter the lights, the deeper the shadows behind them. He lived between ecstasy and emptiness. A man addicted not to drugs, but to the high of feeling everything. But no one, not even Freddie, could keep that fire burning forever. And one quiet afternoon, far away from the noise of champagne and spotlights, he sat in a sterile clinic in London. What the doctor told him that day would strip away the illusion forever. London, 1987. The hospital room was quiet. Too quiet for someone who'd lived his whole life in noise. Freddie Mercury sat perfectly still, his fingers tapping against his knee like a silent metronome. Across from him, the doctor spoke words that froze time. "Freddie, you're HIV positive." For a moment, he didn't breathe. Didn't blink, didn't move. The air seemed to leave the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Almost too calm. "How long do I have?" No one could answer. Months, maybe years. But Freddie didn't want sympathy. He wanted control. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and said the words that would define the rest of his life. No pity, no tears, just music. From that day on, he worked harder than ever. The pain, the fear, he turned it into melody. He recorded through fevers, hid his lesions under makeup, and sang until his voice cracked. During sessions with Queen, he'd collapse between takes, then rise again the moment the red light blinked on. "Roll the tape," he'd say. "Let's go again." His bandmates knew something was wrong. His body was thinner, his movement slower. But Freddie refused to confirm anything. He didn't want their sorrow. He wanted their music. And in that studio, surrounded by the only family that ever truly understood him, Freddie Mercury did what he always did best. He turned tragedy into art. The show must go on. Those 5 words became his defiance, his anthem. Every lyric was coded truth, every note a battle cry. He sang about endurance, about pretending to be fine while falling apart inside. and he meant every word. When Brian May expressed doubt that he could record it, Freddie smirked, took a sip of vodka, and said, "I'll fucksing do it, darling." Then he did, in one flawless take. He never told the press, never announced his illness. To him, the stage was sacred, and his fans deserved light, not pity. But outside that sacred circle, the world was changing. Fear was spreading faster than the virus itself. Governments were silent, churches condemned, newspapers mocked, and Freddie Mercury, the man who once made the world sing, became a symbol of everything society wanted to ignore. Yet, even as the world turned its back, he refused to disappear. Because for Freddie, as long as there was a microphone, there was life. The 1980s were merciless. To be gay, to be sick, to be different, was to be feared. And Freddie Mercury, the man who once commanded stadiums, found himself fighting not just a virus, but a world that turned its back. As the AIDS crisis spread, governments looked away. Newspapers dripped venom. Tabloids called it a plague. Politicians called it punishment. And for millions of people like Freddie, silence was deadlier than the disease itself. He saw it all, about the fear, the ignorance, the cruelty. He watched as friends vanished one by one. He attended funerals in secret, each one chipping away a little more of his fire. But he refused to let the world pity him. "I'm not going to be their victim," he said once. "I'm going to be their reminder." When he could barely walk, he still showed up to record. When his eyesight began to fade, he still directed the camera angles. He worked on "These Are the Days of Our Lives," smiling softly through pain so severe it would have broken most men. At one point, he looked into the lens and whispered to the crew, "I still have so much music inside me." He knew time was slipping, so he raced it. He recorded as much as he could, leaving behind dozens of unfinished songs, messages from a man who refused to stop speaking. Then, on November 23, 1991, after years of rumors and silence, he released a single, devastating statement. Following the enormous speculation in the press, "I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it was right to keep this information private, to protect the privacy of those around me." 24 hours later, he was gone. But that statement, that single paragraph, changed everything. It forced the world to look at what it had chosen to ignore. It gave AIDS a face, a voice, a song. And it made millions realize that the disease wasn't about shame. It was about humanity. Freddie Mercury didn't die of AIDS. He died fighting ignorance. He died reminding the world that truth, even whispered in its final breath, can be louder than any song. And yet, even in death, Freddie wasn't finished. Because somewhere, in an old studio vault, there was one last track. A song no one had ever heard. A song that felt like a message from beyond. Years after his death, an old tape was discovered. Dusty, faint, almost forgotten. When the first notes played, everyone in the studio fell silent. It was Freddie. His voice, softer, thinner, but unmistakable. The song was called "Let Me In Your Heart Again." And it wasn't just a melody, it was a message. Each line felt like a farewell written between breaths. Let me live, let me love. Those weren't lyrics, and they were prayers. A man's final conversation with the world. Mary Austin, the one person who had truly known every side of him, still guards his ashes. She never revealed where they were scattered. "He wanted peace," she said quietly, "and peace he shall have." To her, Freddie was never the rock god the world saw. He was the boy from Zanzibar who wanted to be remembered for more than his voice. And he was. Because every time Bohemian Rhapsody echoes through a crowd, Freddie comes alive again. Laughing, fierce, unbreakable. Every cheer, every harmony is proof that his story didn't end at Garden Lodge. It began there. In his final months, when his voice was fading and his body failing, Freddie looked at Brian May during a recording and whispered, "Don't mourn the voice that's gone silent. Celebrate the songs that live." That's what they did. That's what we still do. In 1992, Wembley Stadium filled once more in a flight. Not for Freddie, but because of him. Elton John, David Bowie, George Michael, the giants of music, all gathered to celebrate the man who taught them how to defy fear through art. The proceeds went to the Mercury Phoenix Trust, funding the fight against AIDS. Freddie's story didn't just end with music. It became a weapon for change. And decades later, his voice still finds ways to return. In 2022, Queen released "Face It Alone," a track Freddie recorded in his final months. It sounded like a ghost reaching through time. fragile, defiant, eternal. He once said, "I'm not going to be a star. I'm going to be a legend." And he was right. Because legends don't die. They echo. And somewhere beyond the spotlight, Freddie Mercury is still singing. Still daring, still free. If Freddie's story moved you, if his courage, his fire, his humanity still echo in you, hit subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which of his songs still gives you chills. Because as long as his voice is heard, the show must go on.